So it's a real pleasure to be here. You know the best way to get an impressive resume is to always work at places where there's super talented people. That's like the trick. And I've been really fortunate to do that both at the Washington Post and now at Stanford. So how many of you were at the D-School last year? All right, awesome, great. So we're going to do some deeper stuff this year. And basically, we have a couple of hours together. I'm going to talk for a little bit about some of the things that I'm teaching at Stanford in organization design and how you design your organization and teams to build a creative culture. So I'll talk about that for a little bit. And then we're going to get hands-on. We're going to do 2 hands-on sessions, and we'll have a break in the middle so we can get some refreshments and things like that. But it won't be a lot of me just standing up here talking at you. Even when I'm talking, it's going to be pretty interactive, okay? So let's start off. How many of you think of yourselves as creative? How many of you think of yourselves as creative? Okay, cool. I want to do a really quick warm-up exercise, and that is just take the pad, take the hotel pad that you have in front of you. I want you to find a partner. If you're not sitting at an even, if you don't have an even number of people at your table, turn to another table and find a partner, okay? So everybody find a partner real quick. You guys are father-son, right? Yeah, okay, good. Okay. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner so you can find somebody. Are we good? We're good? Okay. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you 1 minute to draw a portrait of your partner. Draw a portrait of your partner on that piece of paper. Ready, go. 1 minute. Okay, everybody stop. Put your pencils down. Now I want you to share your drawing with the person that you drew. Go ahead and share your drawing with them. Okay. All right, let me ask you some questions now. So how did that feel? Awkward. It was awkward, right? Okay, what else? How did that feel? It was fun? Is that what you said, fun? No, that's not what you said. How did that feel? Apologetic? I heard some people apologizing, yes. Anything else? How did it feel? Too short a time? There was a really specific time constraint. Anything else? Stressful. It was stressful. How many of you were sitting next to your spouse and it made it really stressful, right? Okay. All right. So the reason why I like to do that activity is because in a room full of adults, if you ask a room full of adults, how many of you think of yourselves as creative? Usually about 50% of the room will raise their hands. And for adults who don't think of themselves as creative, there's a lot of research around this. It goes back to a time when you were 8, 9, 10 years old and somebody told you that you couldn't draw. Or some other artistic endeavor in school, right? Like maybe your clay ashtray that we all made for our parents, right, didn't turn out as well as the kid sitting next to you. And so you were like, I'm not a creative person. I'm going to stick with what I know. That's it, right? So artistic ability is certainly one aspect of creativity. But it's not the only aspect, and it's not what we're focused on at the D-School at Stanford. We talk a lot about creative confidence, and what we mean by that is your ability to try something that maybe you don't feel like you're good at, your willingness to show unfinished work to somebody else, your comfort with ambiguity, all the things that you all just did by doing this exercise. It's not as much about how well you can draw as it is at your willingness to be uncomfortable. And that's because if you want to make something different, right? If you want to make something innovative or unique, I'm going to hit all the drinking word games. Where's Dana? If you want to create something disruptive, okay, then you have to do something different. And doing something different starts with you. Because if you just do the same thing over and over again, you can expect the same outcome, right? So we really focus on how do we make it okay for people to embrace doing something different in order to take a risk, to create a risk-taking culture, to create a risk-taking company that's going to consistently come up with new ideas. All right? We'll do more. You guys seem to enjoy that. We'll do more of those little types of activities going forward. So this was a couple of years ago. I wish it was in Fast Company. It was in another magazine, a lesser magazine, in the Bay Area called Wired. They did an interview with Melinda Gates. And of course, the Gates Foundation is really involved in work in the developing world. And so they asked her, this was the first question in the interview, what innovation do you think is changing the most lives in the developing world? And she said, human-centered design. And what I love about this is, first, that's what I teach, so it's nice that Melinda Gates thinks that's important. But bigger than that is that it's really notable to me that she didn't say a particular product or a service or a piece of technology. She said a process. Human-centered design is a process. And at the D School, we are so focused on the process rather than the outcome, the product or service or technology. Because when you hone in on a process, you end up creating more outcomes than you could have if you had just focused on the outcome. Does that make sense? So one way I think about that is like an onion, right? So if you're at all involved in technology or web design, you know that you put out an app, you have version 1, you're going to have version 2, you're going to have version 3. There's always another layer to that onion, right? That also goes beyond products and services, right? So products and services continue to get redesigned. Companies are replaced by other companies. Even in search, like, big company where we are is Google. Everyone uses Google all the time. You think Google's never going to go away. But every company history shows us ebbs and flows. And Google came after Netscape and then Yahoo and then, right? And so there's always going to be something else that you can make. But when you focus on a process, this is an onion field. So what I try to focus on is how can you as a company create the onion field that consistently yields the new onions, right? So when you're in charge of your company, it's not so much about how do you focus on the product you put out, but I would argue it's how do you create a culture that consistently puts out new products, right? And that has to do with how people embrace their creativity, how they work together, and how they focus on the people you're designing for. These are the D School mindsets. We put D in front of everything. It's just kind of a nerdy thing that we do. I want to talk a little bit about some of these mindsets. So one is radical collaboration. Now, let me just preface this by saying I'm talking about the really out-of-the-box stuff, the innovative part of your company, your aspirations there. There's lots of things that you have market leadership in that you're going to continue to produce, right? I'm not like telling the Google search guys to say, forget about search, let's like do something else, right? No, they're like cranking that out and making tons of money off of it so that they can do self-driving cars or Google Glass or whatever. So this talk and this session is really focused on that other stuff, okay? Not in place of the things that you do that's your consistent revenue driver, okay? So radical collaboration. So this is really important to what we do at the D School. Some of you probably remember from being there, the D School is not a school. We don't offer degrees there. We teach elective courses. We also don't teach what we call big D design, like professional design, product design, web design, things like that. We teach a human-centered design methodology, a way of working, to mostly non-designers. And we teach elective courses to anyone who gets into graduate school at Stanford. So one of the things that's really special about it is we're the only place at Stanford where students from all across the university come together and take classes together and work on projects together. And that's totally intentional. Because our founder, David Kelly, who's kind of a famous product designer, he's the founder of a company called IDEO, and they have offices all over the world, and he designed the mouse for Apple and was friends with Steve Jobs and designed the Palm Pilot way before tablets became ubiquitous and things like that. David looked around campus, he's a tenured professor at Stanford, and he said, these students are all really smart, but they tend to only hang out on their area of campus with other people in the same program. And if you only hang out with people who are similar to you, you're much more likely to come up with incremental ideas in your space. It's easier personally. We're drawn to people who are similar to us. So you have to be intentional about seeking out people who are different from you if you want to figure out how to mash up your skills and come up with something that hasn't been done before. And that's what we do at the D School. So we have students from MBA program, from engineering, from the medical school, from the law school, from education, from journalism. I came to Stanford as a journalism fellow and took classes at the D School. And basically what we're doing is we're getting those different experts to work together to come up with something that they couldn't on their own. And that's kind of the secret sauce. So radical collaboration is a big part of what we do. Everything we do is hands-on learning. We do very little like direct instruction, sort of auditorium style lectures. We think the best way to learn this process is to do it, which many of you did last year, and we're going to spend most of this time doing something different, a little deeper today. We always work on real projects. So we partner with organizations in the real world in order to scope projects for our students. This is a picture of our founding executive director on the train platform there in Palo Alto. This was a project we did with WNYC in New York, the public radio station, and it was about the morning commute news experience. How do you get news in your morning commute? And so they're about to hop on the train when it pulls in and go up and down the aisle and interview strangers about how they get news in the morning. Creative confidence I talked about. We believe that everyone is creative and that for a lot of people who are really successful in their business or people who are in graduate school at Stanford, they've been rewarded every year since they were little for their analytical thinking skills and their abductive reasoning. They're very good at surveying the landscape and coming up with the one right answer, right? And now there are so many problems that don't have one right answer that we really want to focus on building their muscles around what we call creative thinking or divergent thinking, okay? This is the process that we teach. So I talked about how important process is to us. First, this is our napkin manifesto. This is, if you're a startup in Silicon Valley, you have to be able to write your business plan on a napkin or whatever. The D School is a startup. It's only 10 years old at Stanford. I'm going to talk more about that later. But the main thing here is that we focus on innovators before innovations. And what we mean by that is if we can unlock a way of working for the individuals and the teams that we're working with, then their innovations will follow. But if our classes were like, design a new news tablet app, chances are we'd come up with some pretty good ones because we're starting with such talented students, but we'd be limited to create what we thought we wanted to create at the outset. Whereas in the process, you suspend the detail of what you're trying to create and you learn as you go. And you learn by interacting with your users. Most people, when you give them a problem, we are hardwired to go from problem to solution. It's uncomfortable to sit with a problem, right? And so how many times have you been in your business or in your life and someone says, well, here's the thing we're trying to solve, and you're like, you just go heads down, you're like, all right, here's how we might go about solving it, right? Without doing anything in between. This is fine for most of the decisions we have to make, like it's raining, I'm going to get an umbrella, right? Problem, solution. But what we encourage people to do is instead of going straight from problem to solution, instead engage in a process that expands the possible solution set. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but the most obvious one is that if you're working on something really important and you try to go directly from the problem to your solution, your first solution is probably not going to be all that great, right? I mean, just rationally, we don't tend to think of the super out-of-the-box things, right out of the gate, right? So instead of going from problem to solution, we engage in a process that gives us a better chance at that. And we do it with other people. This is the process that we teach. This is design thinking the way the D School teaches it. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Empathy, you'll remember, is how you engage with other people. Not to make what they tell you they want, but to uncover what their needs are, to really understand what their lives are like, to put yourself in their shoes. We do this through observation. We do it through immersion, which means like you do what your user is doing in order to feel what they're feeling. And we do it through engagement, interviewing them, asking them open-ended questions, okay? Once you have gained and gathered a lot of material, now you're going to apply your expertise to that in order to come up with interesting solution. And to do that, you have to define the problem that you're working on. These are the two steps that we're going to focus most on today, empathy and define. Last time we did the whole cycle. We did the wallet exercise, which took us through the whole cycle. So you remember the ideate is you're brainstorming possible solutions, then you're prototyping one of them, then you're testing it, right? And some of you have your wallets, which is just awesome. That is so great. So it's not all fun and games and Post-its and throwing things around in the room at the D School. It's not just about creativity. But what we do is we purposefully separate convergent thinking, that analysis and abductive reasoning, from divergent thinking, or the generative creative style of working. And we do that through these steps. So when you're defining the problem, you're making a lot of decisions, right? And when you're brainstorming, you're trying to separate your ideation from your decision making. You're not evaluating ideas at the same time as you're coming up with them, okay? So it's that separation that's really important, because then you get the best out of both ways of working. We teach this in a linear way, but it's not a linear process. It's after you start to do it and it becomes part of who you are, you can apply just the different stages of this. You can apply it in the full cycle. You could just use empathy, and that's what makes it so malleable. We're teaching more than 40 classes a year at the D School now, and we apply it to all kinds of things: products, digital products, startups, also like policy, public policy, healthcare systems, all kinds of different things, and that's because the methodology is super malleable. But it's dependent on the experts. It's dependent on you to learn how to use it and then apply it within your area of expertise. Show, don't tell. This is another thing that's important to us. We try to make stuff rather than talk about it all the time, and we try to make stuff as quickly as possible. So I want to show you this short little video. This is from IDEO. So IDEO has a unit called the Toy Lab that makes toys for clients. And a couple of years ago, one of their clients was Sesame Workshop. And Sesame had asked IDEO to design an iPhone app for them called Elmo's Monster Maker. It was the Elmo iPhone app for kids. And about an hour before they had a conference call with the client, the designers had a new idea for a feature in the app. And instead of just trying to describe it over the phone, they cut a short video in one take and sent this to them. So they made this an hour before the call with the client. So check this out. So pretty cool, right? So instead of trying to code up something that worked on the device, which would have taken a lot of time and cost a lot more money, they had a huge printer. They printed out the outline of the phone, and they showed how it might work. Guess what happened? Sesame loved it, right? They went for it. It would have been a lot harder to describe that over the phone and get them to say, yeah, let's do it. So we try to show more than we tell. And the interesting thing about that is when you have an artifact to share with someone, they actually tell you a whole lot more than if you're just asking them questions. Okay? Bias toward action. This is another thing that we're about. It's not about like sitting around and waiting until you inside the room come up with the idea and then get out there, or really hone it to get to the one right idea and then go do it. We like to get out in the world as quickly as possible. So you may have heard this story before. This is a student of ours from a couple years ago, Akshay Kathari. And Akshay was a graduate student in computer science at Stanford, and he took a class we teach called Launchpad. And in Launchpad, you have to apply for the class with a prototype of your startup. It doesn't have to be a tech startup. We have all different kinds of ones, but you have to apply with that in order to get into the class. By the 5th week of the class, you have to launch into the world. And by the 10th week of the class, you have to sell something or you fail a class. So it's super fast, right? And Akshay and his co-founder, Ankit Gupta, they had an idea for a news aggregator app. And, but they were both engineers, they're both CS students, and they didn't really know how people might want to experience the news on this new device. And you remember, it's only been 5 years maybe, but you remember when the iPad first came out and people were like, are we gonna hold it in portrait or in landscape, right? And as a designer, I was at the Washington Post at the time, as a designer, that was a big deal. It was like, do we want it to be the same in both views? And does that mean you have to design it on a grid and all that stuff, right? So Akshay, the first prototype he did was on a piece of cardboard, and he would color code Post-it notes to show the various publications that they were aggregating content from, right? And so they could say, if you hold it this way, do you want to swipe sideways through the different publications, or if you hold it this way, do you want to scroll? And every day he would go to this coffee shop on University Avenue right next to Stanford, that's like Main Street, Palo Alto, and test these ideas out. And then at night he would go home and he and Ankit would incorporate into the code that they were building some of the feedback they'd gotten during the day. And eventually they had the app working on the device, and then that would get more people to come. But they went to this coffee shop so much that Ankit, who's a really sweet guy, got banned for life from the coffee shop because he was bothering so many people there testing his product. So this product it was called the Pulse iPad app. Have any of you seen this or used this? Yeah. So Pulse, when it launched, was the #1 news app in the Apple Store. They got a shout out from Steve Jobs on stage, which really helped. And they also got cease and desist letters from the lawyers at the New York Times and the Washington Post. I was at the Washington Post at the time. I was in the meeting, actually, when we drafted the cease and desist letter for these guys because we didn't want them to pull our content. And when I met Akshay a couple years later at Stanford, he said, "Oh, yeah, man, thanks. That was really helpful because the VCs on Sand Hill Road, when we got those letters, they said, if those guys are worried about these kids' thing, then maybe these kids are onto something." And so they used the cease and desist letters to help raise money. They raised about $9 million. They ran the company for a couple of years. Last year, they got acquired by LinkedIn for $90 million. So those of you who are on LinkedIn, you probably get an email that says LinkedIn Pulse with like news of the day. That's from them. That's how they've integrated Pulse into LinkedIn. So this is a huge success story financially, right? And this is a new company. But what we really try to drive home is this wouldn't have happened if Akshay hadn't moved beyond his skill set and gotten out in the real world and asked people what they thought of what he was trying to create every single day, right? Because that's how they nailed the experience. And so bias toward action is really important. Okay, the thing I want to share with you that's different than anything you might have heard before from me or about design thinking is specifically about what I teach at the D School, which is organization design. How do you design your organization to consistently come up with new ideas? How do you design that onion field, okay? Which is terrible. Maybe I should use another. I'll swap that out later on in my other presentations. But how do you create the platform for the new ideas to emerge, right? So the concept of emergence, is anyone familiar with emergence as a systems concept? Okay? There's a great book by a guy named Stephen Johnson called Emergence. Stephen Johnson's an author of a lot of innovation type books. He's a sociologist. He writes kind of like Malcolm Gladwell. So he has a book called Where Good Ideas Come From. His newest one is How We Got to Now. He had a book he wrote in 2000 called Emergence. It was basically looking at systems found in nature and how they might adapt to our world, okay? So emergence as a system is basically, it's a simple system that when replicated becomes a complex system. So one way to look at this is like ants in an anthill. They all have different tasks. There's no boss telling them what to do, and yet the way that they work together creates a systems level change in the soil and in their environment, okay? Here's a really good example, I think. This is from Autodesk. You guys know Autodesk? It's a software company in Silicon Valley. They create B2B software like CAD design software and things like that. So a couple of years ago, Autodesk created this data visualization of their own company and the employee changes that have happened over the years since they started. So check this out. Okay? So every time there's a change, it lights up, and the changes are when somebody moves to a different team or they leave the company. And down here is the timeline. So this is 2007. CEO's in the middle. Employee lights up when they join the company or a change is made which affects their chain of command. When they bring a company in, it appears to explode out of the visualization. Okay? I'll let this keep playing. What does this look like to you? What does it remind you of? Stars, okay, cool. What else? Fireworks, what was that? Pollen, reminds you of pollen? Okay, cool. What's that? The brain, looks like the brain, yeah. A cell, yeah. That's the way I think of it as cellular a lot. So almost all those things that you guys said are natural organisms, right? They come from the natural world. It's cellular, it reminds you of pollen, right? That's because organizations are organisms. They are alive. They are made up of real people, right? This is a data visualization that was done in 2007 of the internet. It looks really similar. And I have to read my notes in order to get this exactly right. But what this is, or actually you guys can read it. What this is it's the 80 or so critical nodes in the middle are surrounded by an outer shell of 5,000 sparsely collected isolated nodes that are dependent on that core. So here's the bottom line. The central core of the internet is made up of 80 core nodes. But even if those nodes fail, 70% of the other nodes would still function because of peer-to-peer connections. Okay? So this was an attempt to map the internet and how these connections work. It looks a lot like that video of the company, right? And this is because what's happened in the digital age is that we're able to connect in an emergent way. It's less about hierarchical systems than it is about bottom-up emergent systems. Okay? Take a look at this. Have you guys ever seen these before? These are starlings, right? Who's in charge? Who's the boss? Everybody? Nobody? Right? How do they know where to go? Good mission statement. Stay in this general area, right? That's good. You don't see birds running into each other. You don't see any of them falling out of the sky, okay? All right, what about this? Fish in a school. This is basically starlings underwater, right? It looks like a cloud in the water, okay? So this is an example of an emergent system, which, remember again, is a simple system that when replicated becomes a complex system, all right? So fish in a school, you have 500 fish. It's not an organization designed for 500 fish. It's designed for 5 fish, and then it's replicated 100 times. So say I'm in a unit of 5 fish, and I'm in the middle, and there's a fish on the left of me, and a fish on the right, and a fish above and below. What are the local behaviors that govern my interaction with those other fish? What do you think? What determines my relationship to the other fish and the direction we're trying to head? There's 3 things. What do you think? Space? That's right. So maintain equal distance between you and the fish next to you. This is almost algorithmic for fish. They're born with this, right? Now, what are we looking for? Food, right? Look for food. We're animals. It's pretty simple. We look for food. We maintain equal distance. What are we staying away from? What do we avoid? Predators. That's right. Maintain equal distance, look for food, avoid predators. So we're swimming along. Fish next to me sees some food, turns this way. I'm maintaining equal distance. I turn this way. Everybody else turns too, right? You see a predator. You know, some of these behaviors supersede the others. I think predator is probably the most important. You see a predator, you turn away. Everybody turns away, right? That's how they move. You take that little 5 unit, you replicate it 100 times, you have a whole school of fish, or you have a flock of starlings, right? So why do I think this is important? I think it's important because this is how the internet works. The internet is an emergent system. And if you want to reach the new generation who is growing up in the digital age, which is a behavior-based age, it's not about trying to get them to fit into the hierarchical systems that most of us grew up with that came out of the industrial age. It's about designing an emergent system that connects with them in the flow of their lives. Okay? So I'm going to give you an example of how the D-School has done this. So there's 4 simple rules for designing an emergent organization. The first one is you want to break things up. You want to have individual fish, or in our case, students, right? You want to look for these independent patterns. What is your unit? 5 fish. It doesn't have to be 5 fish. It can be whatever you decide your little unit is, right? What are the local behaviors that govern their interactions? How do you want them to work with each other to come up with new ideas, all right? And then lastly, you amplify what's working. You replicate it, all right? So here's how that looks at the D school. So this is the way of working for students who come in. They toggle between being a learner and being a doer and being a teacher. And mostly the teacher is with their peers. So if I'm an MBA student and I have business specialty and I'm on a team and nobody else is a business student, sometimes I'm going to be leading the team from that perspective at the appropriate time. Often I'm going to be listening to the engineer or the doctor share their expertise, okay? So you toggle between teacher, doer, and learner. Now we put them into 5-person teams. So all of our classes are project-based, and they're all made up of these multidisciplinary teams. But instead of our students being 5 fish, they're 5 grad students from different programs, right? So you have MBA, engineer, doctor, lawyer, School of Education, right? And the way that they interact with each other is not maintain equal distance, look for food, avoid predators. The way we teach them to interact is the design thinking process, okay? Empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So they are using a shared process in a multidisciplinary team. That's consistent throughout what we do. The variable comes by how we apply it. So if the class is about healthcare, then the challenge is about healthcare. Multidisciplinary teams, using human-centered design, applying it in that framework. The class is about legal services online or designing for the developing world. Those are where the variables come, okay? So this is a different way of leading. When you're leading in a hierarchical system, traditionally, the pressure is on the leader to come up with the vision for where you're trying to go and to assemble a team of talented people to move in an efficient way toward that outcome, right? But the problem there is that you got to know where you're going, right? And then it's about execution. In this new innovation digital age, leadership is less about assembling the team to execute your vision as it is designing an environment and a way of working where the people who work in your system come up with ideas that you couldn't have articulated at the outset, right? They come up with things that are not predetermined. And this is what's happened at the D school. So one little unit inspires the next unit, and then suddenly we're working in all these different areas. Startups that get bought for multi-million dollars, things that are happening in the developing world that are saving lives, all kinds of different things comes out of that core process that we share. Does that make sense? Okay. The D school didn't start out this way. It's only 10 years old. It's a startup within academia at an already entrepreneurial campus, right? Started out in an 80 square foot office where somebody answered the phone and said, "This is the D school." That was the beginning. And then moved for a couple of years to bigger and bigger space. So this is the first space we were in. It was over by the medical school in a temporary trailer. 2005, 2006, we taught one class. We had 50 students. This is some of the professors tearing out the furniture in order to make it not cubicles and make it all interactive so that people can move around. The second space we moved into was an old, used to be a fluid dynamics lab. I don't even know what that is. Some of you probably know what that is. It had like a trough in the middle of the room where the liquid would drain out, and the designers were trying to figure out what to do with it, and they were inspired actually by this video they found on YouTube. This is, I think, from Bangladesh. So it's a market. And the idea was that just because a train comes through for 30 seconds doesn't mean you can't have a market there the rest of the day, right? So the D school is very much designed this way. You have, everything's on wheels, and you put things to the side when you're not in class, and then whoever's teaching the class pulls things out and designs it the way they need to for the class. Last year, so we have a much bigger space now. Last year we taught more than 40 classes. We had more than 1,400 students. So it's scaled in a way that goes way beyond David Kelly's imagination, and is reaching different areas and different fields and different people because of that focus on process. I'm going to skip this real quick. There we go. All right, that was just a video of the space, but most of you have been there. This is another thing that I think is really fascinating. So one of my friends at IDEO, a woman named Jane Fulton-Surrey, who's their creative director, and she's been there for 35 years. She's an anthropologist, so she's the one who really brought empathy into design. She combined anthropology with product design and got people out into the world talking to real users. And for a number of years now, she's been really interested in biomimicry. What are things that we can learn from nature that we can apply to human systems? So she has these, what she calls nature cards, and they have 4 different categories. And one of them, this is just one of the cards, but one of the categories is endurance. And this was really interesting to me. It says, natural systems can be resilient or efficient, but not both. And it goes on to say, efficiency is about expending minimal energy. Resilience is about maintaining function despite disturbance. Diversity, redundancy, and decentralization are key. This, I think, is so applicable to what so many of us are doing right now. If you've been making the same thing and making money off it for a long time, you probably have a very efficient model, right? That makes sense. But in the face of disruption, you need to also have a resilient model that's going to maintain its function no matter what happens. So they have an example over here. Native prairie is resilient. The diverse grasses in the native prairie hydrate the soil at different levels, sustaining it through unpredictable conditions. Down here it says, a beverage company, anticipating that manufacturing systems will need to cope readily with unpredictable material sources and markets, revised their strategy toward design for resilience rather than for efficiency. So something for you to think about. How do you have an efficient system and have a resilient one? Or how do you design for one or the other? Okay, the last thing about emergence, and then we're going to get into a hands-on exercise, okay, is I have another friend out there. How many of you have been to Sonoma or Napa? Okay, it's gorgeous, right? So there's have anyone ever heard of Benziger wine? Has anybody ever had Benziger wine? Yeah, okay, it's good, right? Yeah, so Benziger's like a high-end family winery. They used to own Glen Ellen, the Benziger family, and then they sold it like Pepsi or somebody like that. And so they kept this winery, and it's in Sonoma there. It's right next to Jack London State Park. And the whole winery is built around the concept of biodiversity. And biodiversity is basically you create an ecosystem of which the grapes are one of the outputs, but you're not just like taking advantage of the land to produce as many grapes as possible. So the way he explains it to me is like when they have a pest in their vineyard, right? A lot of wineries will just like zap it, right? They'll put in pesticides to try and get rid of that pest so it doesn't mess up their crop. What they do is they build an ecosystem. They find the predator for that pest and they introduce it into their winery so that it takes care of the pest. Now you have another thing, you know, maybe there are some small rodents who come in. So they have owl stations. Once the owls come, it gets rid of the small rodents. So it's about how do you build an ecosystem that has multiple outputs. It's just the one that they're getting revenue off of is the grapes and the wine. So a biodiverse system actually sustains itself and keeps the soil fresh and will actually have the winery last a whole lot longer than other wineries that aren't in biodiversity. It costs a lot more up front, right, for them to set it up, but it's designing around the ecosystem. Okay, so that's what I think about emergence and how you design organizations, and we can talk more about that later in the Q&A or when you see me around. The thing that we're going to do now is a hands-on exercise where we're really going to dive deeper into empathy and define. And the reason why this is really important is because when you are the expert in your domain, how you ask the question has so much to do with where you're going to end up. So I want us to dive into that a little bit. So I'd love to mix up the room a little bit. A lot of you are sitting with people you work with or are related to or both, and it would be great if you could work with somebody in a different sector for this part. So why don't everybody stand up, and I want you to find a partner from somewhere around the room at a different table, or maybe they come to your table. You can leave your stuff where it is because It's totally safe. Okay, stay standing with your partner. Stay standing. Everybody have a partner? Okay, can I have a volunteer real quick? Candace, will you volunteer with me? Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to your partner. We're going to do a little activity. It's really quick. It's called 1, 2, 3. So basically, I'm going to say 1. She's going to say 2. I'm going to say 3. Then you say 1. I say 2. You say 3. And we'll go as fast as we can. Okay, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3. Got it? Okay, go for it. Go as fast as you can. 1, 2, 3. Stay here. Stay here. Oh, you have a partner. Go ahead. Do it with your partner. We're going to add another wrinkle. So now this time, come back up. Instead of saying 1, you're going to clap. So it's clap 2, 3. Clap 2, 3. Ready? So
2,
3, 2,
3,
2. Exactly. Good. Go for it. Good. Thank you. Okay, good, good. Everybody good? All right. We're going to do one more. We're going to do one more wrinkle. Lieb, I'm going to borrow you for a second this time. All right, one more wrinkle. One more wrinkle. I'm right here in the middle with Lieb. All right, so instead of saying, you're going to keep the clap, and now you're going to substitute 2 with a stomp. Okay? Ready? 3.
3.
Got it. Good. Go. Okay, awesome. You guys are great. Give yourselves a round of applause. Good job. Have a seat with your new partner. Have a seat with your partner. I'm messing with you. You had a beatbox? Nice. Well, I want to hear that later. So let me ask you something. Let me ask you something about that last exercise. What happened when you messed up? You laughed. What happened with your body language? What did your body language do? What? Crap. Yeah, you lean back, you smiled, right? So wouldn't it be great if every time we made a mistake, we laughed? It's like leaning into messing up, right? This is a core thing when you're trying to do something new because you're going to mess up because it's new, right? So I want you guys, when you mess up in this activity, I want you to laugh. I want you to think about embracing failure, okay? And that's a really fun warm-up you can do with your teams. All right, so here's what we're going to do. All of us flew here from somewhere. How many of you checked baggage? How many of you checked bags? Okay, all right, good. How many of you prefer not to check bags? Okay, good. All right, so this is what we're going to do. Right now, we're going to redesign the carry-on bag for somebody else, okay? Now, the way we're going to do this is you each have a partner, decide who's going to be partner A and partner B, and you're going to start by practicing empathy. In just a minute, I want partner A to interview partner B for 5 minutes about their carry-on bag. What kind of carry-on bag do you have? Where did you get it? What do you put in it? Why do you use a carry-on bag? Tell me a story about a time when your bag got lost, right? Those kinds of questions. You want to ask open-ended questions. You want to be curious, right, and respectful, and get them to tell you a story about their carry-on bag, okay? So in the middle of the table, there's some large paper. You can use the Sharpies that are there, but make sure you take notes when you're interviewing your partner. I want you to interview them for 5 minutes, and when the 5 minutes is up, we'll switch roles, and then your partner will interview you, okay? So 5 minutes starts now. Did you learn something interesting about your partner? The way they like to travel? Yes? Okay, good. Some of you very interesting by your laughter, I think. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is you can flip that piece of paper over, or if there's more on the table, you can grab another piece. I want you to design a new carry-on bag for them. Based off of what you heard, you could just sketch it, right? But what are some of the things that you uncovered that maybe they don't like about their bag or the experience of it, and how would you create something for them to try and solve those problems? Okay? So each of you do this on your own. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. You can do it on the back. Yeah, it kind of bleeds through a little bit, but it doesn't have to be perfect. There's more paper in the middle of the table, too. You grab a different piece, okay? So design something new for them that helps solve their problem, okay? Design something new for them. Okay, when you're ready, I want you to share your drawing with your partner. Get some feedback, ask them if they think it's an improvement on their current bag, okay? So go ahead and share with your partner. Okay, how many of you designed a carry-on bag? That's what I asked you to do, right? How many of you designed a carry-on bag? All right, and so it's a bag, but it's probably got something that's a little better than the bag they have now. Maybe the pockets are stationed differently, or it's got like a solar panel, or maybe you like said it might have a GPS in the bag. I like that. That's good, GPS in the bag. Okay, what's that? Cell phone charger. I thought you said self-driving, self-moving bag like a Roomba. Okay, so this is an example of creative problem solving, right? You have a challenge, you have a thing that you want to make better, and you're trying to come up with a creative way to make it better, right? This is certainly a piece of innovation, okay? But now I want you to think about not creative problem solving, but creative problem finding. So what do I mean by that? Okay. So take a look at this. If I ask you this question, what's the answer? 10, right? If I reframe the question like this, what's the answer? It's infinity, right? Because we got decimals and all. I'm not going to get too close to that thing. Okay? So the type of solution you come up with is so baked into the way you ask the question, right? And when you are the expert in your space, you can't help but have a tendency to frame the question around what you're already doing. It's very hard to get outside of your own expertise to think of how you might do something in a completely different way. So I want to show you an example of this with one of our student projects. So you may have heard this before. This is about in a class we have called Design for Extreme Affordability. In that class, the students are partnered with villages in the developing world and NGOs who are on the ground creating physical product solution for those villages. So they might be working on like a new irrigation system for small plot farmers in Ghana, or they're working with coffee growers in Nicaragua, okay? And in this particular year, a couple of years ago, they were working to try and solve a problem or alleviate a problem of infant mortality rates in India. So on the border of India and Nepal, infant mortality rates are really high. And the idea was that the design challenge they were given was to design a lower cost baby incubator for a hospital. If they could design a lower cost baby incubator for a hospital, they could afford more incubators and then take care of more babies, right? That was the idea. So the students, they hopped on a plane, they went there. In this class, they go to the country to do empathy work on the ground. They went to the partner hospital. This is a picture of the room with the incubators in it. When they got in there were no babies in the incubators. And so the students talked to the doctor on duty. They said, are we just here at a bad time? Like, there's not any babies here. Maybe, you know, it's not always like this or whatever. And the doctor, she said, no, it's pretty much always like this. The incubators are underused. And the students said, well, then why do you need more incubators? And the doctor said, well, I'm not sure that we do. The fact is, most of the babies that die are born prematurely in the rural villages. And they die before they can get to the hospital in time to be put into an incubator. So the students, faced with that information, they hopped on a bus and they made their way out to a rural village, and they met a mother whose baby had died. And they interviewed her, and she confirmed what the doctor had said, that she didn't expect the baby to be born then and didn't have time to get to the hospital. So this is the students in their own words now talking about how they grapple with what they were asked to do versus what they found. So the idea is each thing we did before kind of builds on the next step, okay? So I wanted to talk about some concepts at first, remind you of, you know, where I'm coming from, what the D-School is about. Then we did this exercise in reframing about something that's not in your industry, because we've learned that the best way for people to try something new and take a risk is when it's not their work, right? But what I really want is for you to be able to take something away from this that's useful to you in your work. And so this last part is going to be you sharing with somebody else some of the personal challenges that you're facing. So for that reason, I'm not going to ask you to share them with the whole room, okay? Some people may want to share. In general, we will have a chance for that, right? But as you team up, you may want to team up with somebody you don't know that well so that you can talk about those challenges, or you may want to team up with someone who you do know really well. It's up to you. But this is a chance for you to really dig into some of the challenges you're facing and try to get at how you might reframe them, okay? How you might get at the root of the issue. So go ahead, it's a partner-based thing. There are some of these on every table. We're going to go step by step, so don't get started just yet. But find a partner you want to work with that you'll share with, okay? So I don't know about you all, but I suspect that you work so hard and you have so many things in front of you that you don't have a whole lot of time for reflection, okay? And so in this activity, we're going to reflect a little bit, and then we're going to see if there's any patterns from our reflection that we can apply as we move forward with our next projects, okay? So the first step, open up to the first page where it says map your journey. I want each of you individually to take a look at the last several months of your work. What were the high points and the low points? And plot about 4 or 5 of those on this graph. Now, this can be about your work, or it could be about your personal life if you want. It could be about anything that you want, right? But you want to plot what were high points that happened in the last couple of months and what were some low points and sort of detail those out a little bit for yourself, okay? So take about 4 minutes to do that. 4 minutes. Now, working with your partner, decide who's going to go first and walk your partner through those last 6 months. You can share what you want to share, but talk about the highs and the lows. And when you're the partner, you want to ask why a lot. You want to be curious. You want to practice your empathy. So get them to tell you stories about it. Why was this a high? How did that make you feel? Why was this a low? How do you think that could have been different? Okay? So take turns, decide who's going to go first. First person, take 4 minutes to walk your partner through, and then we'll switch roles. All right? Okay, now I want you to turn the page over. It says, what will your next steps be? What will your next steps be? Okay? So for this, each of you individually, I want you to look ahead to the next couple of weeks or months if it's months out. And I want you to write down a priority of something you're going to be working on. What excites you about that? What are your biggest concerns, worries about that, and why? And then at the bottom here, what do you need for that endeavor to be successful? Okay? So you get to pick. Yes? Am I a marriage counselor? We'll talk later. How about that? So that's what you're going to do. What are you working on, and what do you need to be successful? It's really important that when you get to the bottom, you list out a couple of things for what you need. These can be things that you need to do. They're things that other people need to do for you, things that you're doing within your team or your organization that you need to be successful. Okay? So 4 minutes, each of you. Okay, finish up those conversations. Wrap those up. Wrap up those conversations. And what you're going to do now is you're going to take those things that you need on the page before, what do you need to be successful, and you're going to take those things, you're going to move them over to the next page where it says scale the why ladder. So why do you need, so you jot down those 3 biggest needs you have into those spaces. Now, before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing. It does feel a little bit like counseling, because what we're doing is we're trying to get beyond the surface decisions that we make, and we're trying to get to the deeper meaning beneath why you do what you do, right? And there's a very simple way to do this, which is just by asking why. There's an article came out last year that said, no matter what the starting prompt, if you ask somebody why 5 times, they'll end up in tears. Because every time, which is not what we want to have happen here necessarily, unless you need to go there, right? But the reason why that's the case is because every time you ask why, you get beyond the explicit to the implicit down to the meaning, okay? And the reason why meaning is so important is because of this. So when you're designing for somebody else, you want to create something that is useful for them. That's the reason why they will buy it, right? If you want to create something that's useful to somebody else or something that they're going to use, you need to find a way that it fits into their life in a meaningful way. Okay? In order to design something meaningful, you need to understand about their life. This is also true for ourselves. So asking why, even if it's the same way you've done things for a long time, if you stop and ask yourself why, that's how you come up with new ideas. Okay? But what you're doing every time you do that is you're going, it's like an iceberg. You're going from the explicit, the tangible stuff that you can see and touch and feel, it's above the waterline, to the stuff that's right below the waterline, all the way down to the bottom of the iceberg is what has real meaning. So as you go through this, you're going to say, why do I need this thing that I think I need? And then write in the space that says because below it. Now you're going to do this with your partner. So take those needs, transfer them over to the next page and write them there. And then in your discussion with your partner, I want you to listen and say, well, why do you need that? And ask them why again. Well, why is it important to you to have that kind of success? Well, why is that the only way you can go about it? Well, why do you need that other person to work on it with you, right? You're not questioning because you're saying they're wrong. You're questioning because you're getting them to think deeper about it. Why does it have to be an incubator, right? It doesn't, okay? So jot down those things there, and then decide who's going to go first, and as you discuss it, start to write down some of your reasons, the becauses, all right? And you'll have 4 minutes to share, and then we'll switch, and we'll do 4 more minutes, okay? We'll see where we get. All right? Raise your hand if you have any questions. I'll come around. All right, wrap up those conversations, and look up here for a sec. Look up here for a second. So we're going to do just one more step right now. There's another step after that, which you can also do. You could take these with you, and you can look at that part later because it's also a by yourself step. But the last step I want to do right now is now I want you to think back on what do you really need? Has your need changed from when you first jotted it down to the way that you've gotten to it by talking through it with somebody else? If so, I want you to jot down on this how might we page, here's what I really need, and then underneath that, here's one thing I might do to go about it. Okay? So this is a personal step for you. I really need what, and one thing I might do is this. And take a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll wrap up and I'll answer some questions about anything you want to talk about. Okay? You can take this with you and you can look at this next steps. What it says here is, based off of what I've come up with, here's something I commit to trying to do. And here's something I was surprised to learn about my work or the way I think about things. And you can do that for yourself later on that page. I just think this kind of introspection is really important because we're so busy and we're always moving ahead. And if you don't stop and ask yourself why, you might miss some opportunities. It's also really helpful. Well, I'll ask you. How did it feel to be able to share it with somebody else and have them ask you questions about yourself? How did that feel? It was good? How did you develop trust with that other person? Like, did you feel like you could share things that were really important? Okay. You did? Does anybody have anything specific to say about that? Matt.
I'm sorry, Cole. I told Tom way too much.
So one of the ways that we design it this way is because if you're sharing with somebody else and they know they're going to share with you, you can kind of go to the same level that the other person does, right? So you develop a bond because you're both kind of vulnerable in a way, right? You do have to be a little careful with this why ladder stuff because the more you ask why, you'll eventually get to the existential questions, right? And you got to be careful about that if you don't have the answers to those questions, right? But when you're going along and doing your work, just going down 2-3 layers can really yield some interesting insights because most of you are in a position where you get to make the decisions about what you're doing. And a lot of times we get so wrapped up in what we're doing that we feel stuck. And if we don't hit this number or we don't do this or we don't do this thing, then this is going to fall off a ledge, or because we are doing this, we should keep doing this, right? But take time to stop and ask yourself, why? Why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it that way? And this is also a changing way of the way people are working. When I was brought up, in business, asking why is insubordination. Hey, why are we doing this? But now I want people that I work with to ask me why. Because it's going to lead to something else. It's going to lead to discussion. Well, why are you asking why? What do you think we ought to be doing, right? And that kind of collaboration is really important if you want to have a creative culture. All right? So there's a whole lot more I could say about this, but I promised I would leave a little bit of time for questions. So let's do that. And then I'm going to be around, too, so if you want to talk about this later on. And also, here's my contacts. If you want to send me an email, that's my email and my Twitter. Just send me a note. And if you're interested in anything about the D School or your company with the D School, I love to connect people with the right people. It's not always me. We got a lot of people that do really interesting things there. And I'm happy to connect you with resources and things like that. Okay? So thank you all very much.
Justin, thank you. Let's